The handcuffs bit into Lily Morrison's wrists with a coldness that matched the marble floor beneath her knees. Blood smeared across the cream fabric of her borrowed uniform, though she couldn't remember whose blood it was. The foyer of Thornton Estate stretched around her like a cathedral built for judgment, all vaulted ceilings and imported stone that swallowed the sounds of her shallow breathing. James Thornton lay motionless 15 feet away, his silver hair stark against the Persian rug where he'd fallen. The paramedics worked over him with practiced urgency, their movements precise and mechanical. One of them called out numbers that meant nothing to Lily, but everything to the machines they'd connected to his chest. Amanda Sterling stood at the base of the grand staircase, one manicured hand pressed to her throat in a performance of horror. The emerald pendant at her neck caught the light from the chandelier as she turned to the lead detective, her voice cracking just enough to sell the grief. "She poisoned him. I caught her adding something to his evening medication. When I confronted her, she attacked him." The detective's pen scratched across his notepad. His eyes never left Lily's face, cataloging every detail of her guilt or innocence with the detachment of a butcher selecting cuts of meat. Lily opened her mouth to speak, to explain, to scream the truth that no one in this room would believe. But the officer behind her pressed down on her shoulder, and the weight of that hand carried the full authority of a system that had already decided her story. "Lily Morrison, you're under arrest for attempted murder." The words echoed in the vast space, bouncing off walls that cost more than everything Lily had ever owned combined. She watched James Thornton's chest rise and fall with the assistance of the oxygen mask they'd strapped over his face, and she thought about dignity, about how some people spent their whole lives accumulating it, while others had to fight for every scrap. Amanda's smile was so slight that only Lily caught it, a razor-thin curve of triumph that disappeared the moment the detective glanced her way. The smell of truffle oil and desperation hung in the air of the Crown, like expensive perfume attempting to mask rot. Lily Morrison moved through the Friday evening dinner rush with the practiced invisibility of someone who'd learned that being noticed meant being blamed. Her feet ached in the required black heels, but she kept her posture straight, her expression pleasant, her hands steady as she balanced a tray of champagne flutes worth more than her monthly rent. Table 12 ordered oysters without looking at her. Table 15 sent back the Dover sole because it wasn't the right temperature, though Lily suspected the real crime was that the gentleman's mistress had just texted to cancel their weekend plans. Table 9 tipped exactly 15% and left a business card as if Lily's dream was to sell insurance to strangers who couldn't remember her face. She was 24 years old and had been invisible for most of them. The kitchen doors swung open on pneumatic hinges that cost $3,000, because regular hinges apparently weren't good enough for the kind of people who ate at the Crown. Lily deposited her tray and checked her phone. The screen cracked from when she'd dropped it rushing between her day shift here and her night shift at the diner on 42nd Street. One new message from Sunrise Memory Care, the facility where Grace Morrison spent her days forgetting who Lily was. "Your account is past due. Payment required by Monday, or we'll need to discuss alternative arrangements." Alternative arrangements. The corporate phrase for dumping a 58-year-old woman with advanced Alzheimer's onto the street because her adopted daughter couldn't conjure $15,000 out of thin air. Lily deleted the message and returned to the dining room where Henderson was watching her with the focused malice of a man who'd peaked in high school and never forgiven the world for moving on. He crooked one finger, summoning her to the host stand with the casual cruelty of someone who knew she couldn't refuse. "Table 4 needs attention. The gentleman has been waiting 3 minutes for his water refill." 3 minutes. In Henderson's universe, that constituted a war crime. Lily grabbed a fresh pitcher and made her way to table 4, where an elderly man sat alone by the window, staring out at the rain-slicked street with the expression of someone watching a life he no longer recognized. His hands rested on the white tablecloth, trembling slightly, the kind of tremor that spoke of neurological decline rather than simple age. She'd seen him before. Every Wednesday for the past 8 months, same table, same order, Scottish salmon, no sides, black coffee. He never brought company, never made phone calls, never did anything but sit and eat and leave a tip that suggested he remembered what it was like to work for wages. "Good evening, sir. My apologies for the delay." James Thornton looked up at her, and for just a moment something shifted in his expression. Recognition, maybe, or confusion, or the ghost of a memory that wouldn't quite surface. His eyes were gray, the color of Atlantic storms, and they focused on her face with an intensity that made her want to step back. "You're new," he said, though she wasn't. "I've been here 8 months, sir." A slight smile, sad at the edges. "Then I suppose I'm the one who's new. New at paying attention." He ordered the salmon. When Lily turned to leave, his voice stopped her. "The locket. May I ask where you got it?" Her hand moved automatically to the silver pendant at her throat, the one piece of jewelry she owned that wasn't costume nonsense from a discount store. Inside was a photograph so faded she could barely make out the features, a woman holding an infant, both of them smiling at someone behind the camera. "It was my mother's. Birth mother. She died when I was 3. James Thornton's face went very still, the kind of stillness that came before earthquakes. His trembling hands gripped the edge of the table. "I see. My apologies for prying." But he kept staring at the locket, and Lily felt the weight of that gaze long after she'd retreated to the kitchen. The dinner rush intensified. Table 7 wanted their steaks refired. Table 18 sent back the wine because it was corked, which it wasn't, but the customer was always right even when they were demonstrably wrong. Henderson hovered like a particularly aggressive wasp, critiquing Lily's posture, her smile, the way she arranged the silverware, searching for any excuse to write her up. At 8:30, James Thornton's salmon arrived. Lily placed it before him with the careful precision of someone handling nitroglycerin. "Your meal, sir?" He looked at the plate, then at her. "I have a request. It's irregular, but I'm hoping you might accommodate an old man's eccentricity." Lily waited, her professional smile fixed in place. "I need to take my medication with food, and the timing is specific. Could you bring me a glass of warm milk with honey at precisely 8:45? It was 8:32. The request was simple enough, except that the Crown didn't do warm milk. They did $300 wines and craft cocktails that required a mixologist with a degree in chemistry. Warm milk was the kind of thing you ordered at a diner, not a restaurant where the napkins cost $12 each. "I'll see what I can arrange, sir." Henderson materialized beside her the moment she reached the service station. "What did table 4 want?" "Warm milk with honey, for medication." His face went through several shades of red before settling on purple. "We don't serve warm milk. This isn't a goddamn nursing home. Tell him to order something from the menu or drink water like a normal person." "He's a regular customer, Mr. Henderson. It's a simple request." "I don't care if he's the King of England. We have standards. You tell him no, or I'll tell him no, and I guarantee he won't like my version." Lily thought about her mother, about the message on her phone, about the fact that she was exactly one paycheck away from homelessness. She thought about dignity and what it cost to keep it. "Yes, sir." She returned to table 4, where James Thornton was cutting his salmon into precise portions, his trembling hands struggling with the knife. Up close, she could see the medication bottles in his jacket pocket, the labels turned inward for privacy. She could also see something else, the slight yellowing of his skin, the way his breathing seemed labored, the telltale signs of someone whose body was betraying them one system at a time. "I apologize, Mr. Thornton, but we're unable to accommodate the warm milk request. House policy." He set down his fork carefully, disappointment crossing his features. "I understand. Rules are rules." But Lily saw the way his hand shook as he reached for the medication bottle, saw him hesitate, and then put it back in his pocket. Whatever he needed to take required food, and he wasn't willing to risk it without the proper buffer. She made a decision that would cost her everything. "Give me 5 minutes." The kitchen had whole milk for the pastry chef's creme brulee. Lily heated it in a small saucepan, added honey from the pantry, and poured it into a coffee cup because the Crown didn't stock glasses appropriate for warm milk. Henderson was busy berating a line cook about portion sizes. His back turned his radar momentarily offline. She delivered the cup to James Thornton at exactly 8:45. His face transformed genuine gratitude, replacing the carefully maintained neutrality of the very wealthy who'd learned to expect disappointment. Thank you. You have no idea what this means. But she did actually. She'd spent 2 years in nursing school before the incident that ended her career before it started, and she recognized the symptoms of someone managing a chronic condition through careful timing and precise routine. Whatever medication James Thornton was taking, it required food to prevent gastric damage, and the timing window was narrow. He took 2 pills with the warm milk, and the relief on his face was immediate. Lily was turning to leave when Henderson's voice cut through the ambient noise of the dining room like a knife through silk. "Morrison, my office, now." The walk across the restaurant felt like a perp walk, every eye tracking her movement, every patron's conversation pausing to watch the drama unfold. Henderson's office was a converted storage closet that smelled of cleaning supplies and failed ambition barely large enough for a desk and 2 chairs. He closed the door. "I gave you a direct order and you disobeyed it. That's grounds for termination." "A customer needed help. I provided it." "A customer wanted special treatment that violates our service standards." "You don't get to make executive decisions, Morrison. You're a waitress, not a doctor." The last word landed like a slap, and Henderson's smile said he knew exactly what he was doing. 2 years ago, Lily Morrison had been 3 months from her nursing degree when a supervisor accused her of stealing morphine from the hospital pharmacy. The investigation found no proof, but the accusation was enough. Her clinical placement was terminated. Her student loans came due, and the nursing board suspended her application for licensure pending resolution of the allegations. The case was dropped 6 months later due to lack of evidence, but the damage was permanent. No hospital would hire someone with that shadow hanging over them, even if the shadow was pure fabrication. Henderson leaned back in his chair, savoring his power. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to go back out there and tell Mr. Thornton that you made a mistake. Apologize for overstepping your authority. Then you're going to work the rest of your shift without another word of complaint. Or you're fired, and I'll make sure every restaurant in this city knows exactly why." Lily stood there calculating the cost of pride versus survival. Her mother needed her. Grace Morrison, who'd taken in a traumatized 3-year-old and raised her with the kind of fierce love that poverty couldn't diminish, was forgetting how to eat, how to dress herself, how to recognize her own daughter's face. The Alzheimer's was aggressive. The care was expensive, and Lily was the only thing standing between her mother and a state facility where they warehoused the indigent and forgot they existed. "I understand." She returned to the dining room, her professional smile rebuilt from the wreckage of her dignity. But before she could reach table 4, Henderson followed her, his face flushed with the particular rage of small men given small amounts of power. "Actually, I've changed my mind. I'll handle this conversation myself." He strode to James Thornton's table, his voice loud enough to carry to the surrounding diners. "Sir, I need to apologize for my employee's inappropriate behavior. She had no authority to provide you with outside menu items, and I've addressed the situation." James Thornton set down his fork, his expression unreadable. "The young lady was responding to a medical need. I'm grateful for her assistance." "With respect, sir, we have policies for a reason. If every customer demanded custom service, we'd be running a circus instead of a fine dining establishment." The restaurant had gone quiet, that particular silence that preceded either violence or scandal. Lily stood frozen beside the service station, watching her life implode in real time. James Thornton's voice was soft but carried the weight of someone accustomed to being heard. "I've been coming to this restaurant for 3 years. In that time, I've spent approximately $40,000 on meals I barely remember. Tonight, your employee showed me more consideration than I've received in 3 decades of patronizing establishments like this one. If you terminate her for an act of basic human decency, you'll lose my business permanently." Henderson's face cycled through shock rage and calculation. He opened his mouth closed. It opened it again. And then he slapped Lily Morrison across the face. The sound was sharp and clean, a crack of violence that silenced even the ambient music. Lily's head snapped to the side, her cheek blooming red, her eyes watering from the impact. She tasted blood where her teeth had cut the inside of her mouth. She didn't move, didn't cry, didn't raise her hand to her burning cheek. She simply stood there, absorbing the blow with the kind of dignity that only came from a lifetime of absorbing blows, and met Henderson's eyes with a level gaze that said he hadn't broken her. James Thornton stood up so fast his chair clattered backward. His face was white with fury, his trembling hands clenched into fists. But before he could speak, another voice cut through the tension. "Uncle James, please don't make a scene." Amanda Sterling glided across the dining room as if she'd been summoned by the scent of drama, her designer dress flowing around her like water, her expression a perfect mask of concern. She was 35 and beautiful in the way that required significant investment, all sharp cheekbones and strategic fillers and teeth too white to be natural. She touched James Thornton's arm with the familiarity of family. "You're getting upset over a waitress. It's not good for your blood pressure. Let's just go and I'll handle this quietly." James looked at Amanda, then at Lily, then at Henderson. The rage in his eyes dimmed to something colder, more calculated. He reached into his wallet and pulled out $500 bills, dropping them on the table. "For the inconvenience." Then he walked out without another word, leaving Lily standing there with her burning cheek and her shattered employment, and the growing realization that dignity was a luxury she couldn't afford. Henderson waited until James was gone before leaning in close enough that Lily could smell the coffee on his breath. "You're fired. Get out of my restaurant." Lily's apartment in Queens was a fourth-floor walk-up with radiators that clanged like timpani and windows that wouldn't close properly no matter how much weather stripping she applied. The rent was $1,200 a month for 300 square feet of chipped linoleum and water-stained ceiling tiles, which was considered a bargain in a city where even roaches paid premium prices. She sat on her mattress, which lay directly on the floor because bed frames cost money she didn't have, and stared at the eviction notice taped to her door. 7 days. Then the marshals would come and everything she owned would end up on the sidewalk for scavengers to pick through. Her phone buzzed. Sunrise Memory Care calling for the third time that week. She let it go to voicemail. Outside the city rumbled with the sound of people going places, doing things, living lives that had forward momentum. Lily felt like she was falling, had been falling for years, and the ground kept getting closer, but never quite arrived. Her cheek still throbbed where Henderson had struck her. She'd checked it in the bathroom mirror before leaving the Crown, half expecting to see a handprint branded into her skin like something from a medieval morality tale. But there was just redness, already fading, the kind of injury that would be invisible by morning. The invisible kind was always the worst. She thought about James Thornton, about the way he'd looked at her locket, about the tremor in his hands, and the careful timing of his medication. She thought about Amanda Sterling's perfectly manicured intervention, about how quickly she'd appeared, as if she'd been waiting in the wings for exactly this kind of disruption. Lily opened her locket and stared at the faded photograph inside. The woman holding the infant had dark hair and a smile that seemed uncertain, as if she wasn't sure whether she was allowed to be happy. The baby was wrapped in a white blanket, and someone had written on the back of the photo in handwriting so old it was barely legible, "Catherine and baby, 2000. Her birth mother, dead before Lily had any real memories of her. Grace Morrison had found 3-year-old Lily wandering in a park clutching this locket, unable to speak. The police had searched for relatives, found none, and eventually Grace had adopted her through a process that involved more paperwork than love, but resulted in the same thing, a family. Grace used to tell her stories about that day, about how Lily had been wearing a dress that was too big for her and shoes that didn't match, about how she'd refused to let go of the locket, even when the social workers tried to take it for evidence. Grace had fought to let her keep it, and eventually the bureaucracy had relented because fighting a 3-year-old for a piece of costume jewelry felt cruel even by government standards. Lily closed the locket and lay back on her mattress, staring at the water stain on the ceiling that looked like a map of countries that didn't exist. Tomorrow she'd start looking for another job, knowing that Henderson would poison every well he could reach. Tomorrow she'd figure out how to come up with $15,000. Tomorrow she'd solve the unsolvable equation of her life. Tonight she'd let herself fall. The call came at 2 a.m, ripping Lily from dreams of drowning. "Is this Lily Morrison?" "Yes." "This is Mercy General Hospital. Your mother, Grace Morrison, was brought in an hour ago. You're listed as her emergency contact." The subway didn't run frequently at 2 a.m., and the taxi would cost $40 she didn't have. Lily ran. 6 blocks to the station, 3 stops to Mercy General, another 4 blocks through streets that smelled of garbage and broken dreams. Her lungs burned, her feet blistered in the dress shoes she hadn't bothered to change out of her mind, cycling through every worst-case scenario. The emergency room was fluorescent bright and filled with the kind of desperate humanity that only surfaced after midnight. Lily gave Grace's name to the admitting nurse and was directed to Bay 7, where her mother lay behind a curtain that provided the illusion of privacy. Grace Morrison looked small against the hospital sheets, her gray hair thin and wild, her eyes open but unfocused. An IV drip fed clear fluid into her arm, and various monitors beeped with the rhythm of a body trying to stay alive. "Mom." Grace turned her head, and for just a moment recognition sparked in her eyes. "Lily, you came." "Of course I came. What happened?" But Grace's moment of clarity was already fading, her expression slipping back into the fog that had become her permanent residence. A doctor appeared young enough that Lily wondered if he was old enough to legally drink clipboard in hand. "Ms. Morrison, I'm Dr. Chen. Your mother experienced acute kidney distress. We've stabilized her, but her condition is concerning. When was her last dialysis appointment?" Lily's mouth went dry. "Dialysis. She's not on dialysis." The doctor checked his clipboard, frowning. "According to her blood work, she should be. Her kidney function is severely compromised. Has she been experiencing increased fatigue? Confusion beyond her baseline? Alzheimer's symptoms?" "She has Alzheimer's. Everything is confusing." "Right. Well, we'll need to keep her for observation, run more tests. Do you have insurance information?" The question was routine administrative, the kind of thing that determined whether Grace got a private room or a hallway gurney. Lily thought about the unpaid bill at Sunrise Memory Care, about the eviction notice on her door, about the job she'd lost 3 hours ago. "I'll need to check." The doctor nodded, already moving on to the next crisis, the next patient, the next impossible situation that somehow had to be resolved. Lily sat in the plastic chair beside Grace's bed and took her mother's hand, the skin papery and cool, the bones too prominent. "I've got you, Mom. We're going to figure this out." Grace squeezed her hand, and Lily chose to believe it was intentional. At 4 a.m., while Lily was half dozing in the uncomfortable chair, a commotion erupted near the main ER entrance. Raised voices, urgent footsteps, the particular chaos that accompanied someone important arriving in distress. Lily stood up, drawn by instinct or curiosity, or the nurse's training that had never quite left her despite the ruined license. Through the gap in the curtain she saw them wheel in a gurney carrying an elderly man, his face gray, his breathing labored. 2 people flanked the gurney, Amanda Sterling, her perfect makeup somehow still intact despite the hour, and a man Lily didn't recognize, tall and shark-eyed in an expensive suit. James Thornton. The man from The Crown, the one who'd defended her, the one who'd left $500 like it was pocket change. He was unconscious now, hooked up to monitors that screamed urgency in their insistent beeping. A doctor appeared, barking orders. Amanda spoke in urgent whispers, gesturing, explaining. The shark-eyed man stood silent, his attention fixed on his phone, his body language radiating the particular impatience of someone whose time was worth more than most people's annual salary. Lily watched them wheel James Thornton into one of the private bays, the ones reserved for patients with insurance and influence. Amanda followed, but the shark-eyed man stayed behind, and Lily caught fragments of his phone conversation. "No, the board doesn't need to know yet. We'll handle this quietly." He paused, listening. "Of course, I'm sure. The dosage has been consistent. If anything, we should increase it. The old man's constitution is stronger than we anticipated." Ice flooded Lily's veins. She pressed herself against the wall, invisible in her waitress uniform, just another piece of hospital furniture. The man continued his conversation, oblivious to her presence. "Digitalis toxicity looks exactly like congestive heart failure. The autopsy won't find anything suspicious, and even if they do, he's 68 with a documented heart condition. Natural causes. Derek, stick to the plan." He ended the call and walked toward James Thornton's bay, his expression smoothing into concern so practiced it could have been genuine. Lily's nursing training, dormant for 2 years, roared back to life. Digitalis, a cardiac medication that in therapeutic doses regulated heart rhythm. In higher doses, it caused the exact symptoms she'd observed in James Thornton: tremor, yellowing skin, cardiac distress. Someone was poisoning him. She looked at Grace, still sleeping peacefully in her medicated fog. She looked at the private bay where James Thornton lay dying from something his doctors thought was natural. She thought about dignity, about the slap she'd taken without flinching, about $500 that wouldn't come close to solving her problems, but had been offered anyway. She thought about whether speaking up had ever helped her, whether being right had ever protected her from being destroyed. And then she thought about what happened when good people stayed silent. Lily pulled out her phone and started recording. The recording on Lily's phone was 18 seconds of muffled audio that would mean nothing to anyone who didn't understand medical terminology. Derek Vaughn's voice discussing digitalis toxicity and autopsy results, casual as someone ordering coffee, planning murder with the efficiency of a corporate merger. Lily stood in the fluorescent wasteland of the emergency room hallway, her thumb hovering over the delete button. 18 seconds that could destroy her life or save someone else's. The mathematics of heroism had always been ugly. A nurse brushed past her, irritation radiating from every movement. Lily was blocking traffic, standing in the middle of a corridor designed for emergencies, paralyzed by a decision that felt too large for her exhausted brain to process. Grace was stable. The doctors had said so. Stable meant not dying, which was the best-case scenario for a woman whose kidneys were failing and whose mind had already left the building. Lily could stay here, could protect her mother from the next crisis, the next bill, the next impossible choice. Or she could walk into James Thornton's private bay and detonate her life for the second time in 8 hours. She chose detonation. The private area was separated from the general chaos by actual walls instead of curtains, a luxury that cost approximately $3,000 per night. Amanda Sterling sat in a leather chair that the hospital kept for families who could afford to grieve. In comfort, her phone pressed to her ear, her voice pitched low. Derek Vaughn stood at the foot of James Thornton's bed, studying the monitors with the focused attention of someone checking stock prices. He looked up when Lily entered, his expression cycling through confusion, recognition, and annoyance in rapid succession. "Excuse me, this is a private room." Lily ignored him. James Thornton was conscious, but barely, his gray eyes struggling to focus, an oxygen mask covering his nose and mouth. The monitors showed a heart rhythm that stuttered and jumped, the visible evidence of a system under attack. A doctor was reviewing the chart, young and tired and already 3 steps behind whatever crisis was developing. Lily moved to his side, her voice pitched to carry authority she no longer legally possessed. "He's presenting with digitalis toxicity. Check his serum levels immediately." The doctor looked up, startled. Amanda ended her phone call with surgical precision. Derek's expression hardened into something that could cut glass. The doctor's name tag read Patel, and he had the hollow-eyed look of someone in the 36th hour of a shift designed to break human spirits. "I'm sorry, who are you?" "Someone with eyes. Look at the yellowing of his sclera, the tremor in his extremities, the cardiac arrhythmia pattern. Those aren't symptoms of standard heart failure. That's poisoning." Amanda stood up, her voice dripping with concern so authentic it would have won awards. "Doctor, I'm terribly sorry. This woman was fired from her waitressing job earlier tonight for harassing my uncle. She's clearly having some kind of breakdown." Derek moved closer, his phone already in hand. "I'm calling security." But Dr. Patel was studying James Thornton's monitors with new attention, his exhaustion briefly overridden by the possibility that he was missing something critical. In teaching hospitals, missing things got you sued. Missing things got people killed. "What's your medical background?" 2 years nursing school before I was forced out. I know what digitalis toxicity looks like." Amanda's laugh was a crystal thing, delicate and sharp. "She's a disgraced nursing student who was accused of stealing drugs. Uncle James, please tell this doctor that you don't know this person." James Thornton pulled the oxygen mask down with trembling fingers. His voice was weak but clear. "Run the test." "Doctor." Patel hesitated for exactly 3 seconds, calculating the political cost of listening to a stranger versus the medical cost of ignoring a potentially fatal diagnosis. Medicine 1. Get me a digitalis-level stat. Derek stepped forward, his corporate smile never wavering. Doctor, with respect, my wife and I are Mr. Thornton's medical proxies. We've been managing his care for months. This woman is a stranger with a history of instability. Then the test will prove her wrong. 5 minutes. Security arrived before the lab results did. 2 guards with the build of men who'd learned conflict resolution through applied force, summoned by Derek's phone call, ready to remove the problem that Lily represented. Amanda pointed at Lily with one perfectly manicured finger. She's trespassing and harassing a patient. Please escort her out. The larger guard moved toward Lily, his hand already reaching for her arm. She took 1 step back, her phone held up like a shield. Touch me and I'll file assault charges. I'm a witness to a felony. You're delusional. Lily looked directly at Derek Vaughn, her voice steady despite the adrenaline screaming through her system. Digitalis toxicity looks exactly like congestive heart failure. That's what you said on the phone 17 minutes ago. You also mentioned that the dosage has been consistent and should be increased. Want to explain that to the nice doctor? The room went silent, except for the steady beep of James Thornton's monitors. Derek's face remained perfectly neutral, but something shifted behind his eyes, a calculation being made in real time. I have no idea what you're talking about. Then you won't mind if I play the recording. She didn't have a recording. The audio on her phone was too muffled, too far away, legally inadmissible, and practically useless. But Derek didn't know that, and the flicker of uncertainty that crossed his features was enough to confirm everything. Dr. Patel's pager shrieked. He checked it, and his expression transformed into something between horror and fury. Digitalis level is 4.2. Therapeutic range is 0.5 to 2.0. He's been poisoned. The words hung in the air like smoke after an explosion. Amanda's mask of concern cracked just slightly, her eyes narrowing as she recalculated whatever strategy had brought her to this hospital at 4 in the morning. That's impossible. Uncle James takes his medication exactly as prescribed. If there's toxicity, it's an error by his pharmacy. Dr. Patel was already moving barking orders to nurses who appeared with the practiced speed of people accustomed to emergencies. Activated charcoal cardiac monitoring, possible dialysis if his kidneys couldn't clear the poison fast enough. James Thornton watched Lily through the chaos, his expression unreadable. Security still stood in the doorway, uncertain whether they were witnessing a rescue or a disruption. The larger guard looked at Dr. Patel for guidance. Sir, do you want her removed? She just saved this man's life. She stays. Derek's hand tightened on his phone, his posture rigid with barely controlled rage. Amanda moved to James's side, her hand on his shoulder, her voice soft and wounded. Uncle James, I don't understand what's happening. We've been so careful with your medications. But James was looking at Lily, and in his eyes was the same expression she'd seen at the Crown when he'd noticed her locket, recognition mixed with something deeper, something that looked like grief. The guard's radio crackled, a voice requesting Derek Vaughn report to the administrative office immediately. Hospital security, it seemed, had questions about the pharmacy records for James Thornton's prescriptions. Derek left without another word, his expensive suit and shark eyes disappearing into the corridor like smoke. Amanda stayed her performance of devoted niece continuing even as the walls closed in. She held James's hand, whispered reassurances, played her role with the dedication of someone who'd spent years perfecting the mask. Dr. Patel pulled Lily aside, his voice low. How did you know? I watched him at dinner 6 hours ago. The tremor, the careful timing of his medication with food, the yellowing skin. He was showing chronic toxicity symptoms, not acute cardiac failure. Someone's been poisoning him slowly. And you just happened to be here when he was admitted. Lily gestured toward the curtained bay where Grace lay sleeping. My mother was brought in with kidney failure. Wrong place, right time. Or right place. Dr. Patel studied her with the assessing gaze of someone trying to solve a puzzle. You said you were forced out of nursing school. Why? Because someone needed a scapegoat and I was convenient. He nodded slowly, understanding passing between them without further explanation. Hospitals ran on hierarchy and liability, and sometimes innocent people got crushed in the machinery. If you're right about this being intentional poisoning, the police will need statements. You should stay. But Lily was already looking at Grace's curtained area, calculating how long she could afford to be a hero before she had to return to being a daughter. The police arrived at dawn, two detectives with the weathered expressions of people who'd seen every variation of human evil and found none of it surprising. They separated everyone: James to a secured room, Amanda to a private office, Derek to a conference room with his lawyer Lily, to a supply closet that doubled as an interview space. Detective Sarah Ramos was 40-something with gray threading through her black hair and eyes that missed nothing. She sat across from Lily in the supply closet, a digital recorder between them, and asked the questions that would determine whether this was attempted murder or medical malpractice. Lily told her about the overheard phone call about Derek's casual discussion of dosages and autopsies. She played the muffled audio, watched Ramos's expression darken as she strained to make out words that were more suggestion than evidence. "This isn't enough for an arrest warrant." "I know. But it's enough to start an investigation. Mr. Thornton's pharmacy records his medical history, his relationship with his niece and her husband. We'll dig." Ramos leaned back, studying Lily with the same assessing look that Dr. Patel had used. "You're either very brave or very stupid." "Can't it be both?" A ghost of a smile. "Derek Vaughn is a corporate attorney with connections that go all the way to the mayor's office. His wife comes from old money. You're a fired waitress with a disciplinary record. If this goes sideways, they'll bury you." "They're already burying me. At least this way I get to choose the hole." Ramos closed her notebook. "Stay available. We'll be in touch." Lily returned to Grace's bay to find her mother awake and agitated, pulling at her IV line with the strength of someone whose mind couldn't process why her body was trapped. A nurse was trying to calm her, speaking in the sing-song voice people used for children and the demented. "Mom, it's okay. You're in the hospital. You're safe." Grace's eyes focused on Lily, and for one crystalline moment recognition flared. "You look just like her. Just like Catherine." The moment passed and Grace slipped back into confusion, but the name hung in the air like an echo. Catherine. The woman in the locket photographed the birth mother who'd died when Lily was 3, the ghost that had shaped her entire life without ever speaking. Lily had never known her mother's first name. The adoption records were sealed, the social workers long retired, the past buried under 21 years of bureaucratic sediment. Grace had only ever called her your mother, in the rare moments when she'd been willing to discuss Lily's origins at all. But now, in the fluorescent dawn of a hospital room, that name had surfaced. Catherine. The bail amount was set at $5,000, which was $4,958 more than Lily had in her bank account. She sat in the holding cell at the precinct, staring at cinder block walls painted institutional beige, trying to understand how saving a man's life had landed her on the wrong side of bars. The charges were creative trespassing, harassment, interfering with medical treatment. Derek Vaughn's lawyer had worked quickly, painting Lily as an unstable ex-employee with a vendetta and a history of drug-related offenses. The fact that those offenses had never been proven didn't matter. The accusation was enough to make her radioactive. Detective Ramos appeared at 10 a.m., her expression carefully neutral. "You've been bailed out." "By who?" "Anonymous donor. You're free to go, but don't leave the city. This investigation is just starting." Lily stepped into the bright November morning, free, but not free-saved, but not saved. A black town car idled at the curb, the kind of vehicle that cost more per day to rent than Lily's monthly income. The rear window rolled down, and a man she'd never seen before gestured for her to approach. He was elderly, distinguished, wearing a three-piece suit that probably cost more than a used car. His face had the pleasant neutrality of professional service workers who'd learned to be invisible while remaining essential. "Miss Morrison, my name is Thomas Granger. I'm Mr. Thornton's personal attorney. He'd like to speak with you." "I don't think that's a good idea. He's the one who posted your bail." The car's interior smelled of leather and money. Granger drove in silence through Manhattan traffic, heading uptown toward addresses that Lily had only seen in magazines. They pulled up to a pre-war building on Fifth Avenue, the kind of place with a doorman who wore white gloves and knew every resident's name. The penthouse elevator required a key. Granger used his, and they ascended in silence that felt like church. James Thornton's apartment was a study in understated wealth, original artwork, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park furniture that had probably been designed by someone with one name. He sat in a leather chair near the window, looking healthier than he had 12 hours ago, but still fragile, still marked by whatever poison had been flowing through his system. Granger excused himself with the discretion of someone practiced at creating privacy. James gestured to the chair across from him. "Please, sit." Lily remained standing, her arms crossed, her defenses up. "Why did you bail me out?" "Because you saved my life and Derek Vaughn tried to destroy yours for it." That seemed like an injustice worth correcting. "Correcting costs money. I can't pay you back." "I'm not asking you to." He picked up a folder from the side table, his hands steadier than they'd been at the restaurant, but still carrying that fine tremor. He opened it, revealing documents that Lily couldn't read from her position. "I've been investigating you, Miss Morrison. I hope you'll forgive the intrusion, but recent events suggested that understanding who you are might be important." "There's not much to understand. I'm nobody." "That's demonstrably false. You're a woman who spent 2 years in nursing school maintaining a 4.0 GPA while working 3 jobs, who was accused of theft by a supervisor later convicted of embezzling from the hospital pharmacy, who has cared for an adopted mother with Alzheimer's disease for 5 years, sacrificing your own future to ensure her dignity." Lily's throat tightened. "You don't know anything about me." "I know you wear a locket with a photograph of a woman named Catherine and an infant. I know you were found in Riverside Park 21 years ago, unable or unwilling to speak, clutching that locket like it was the only thing tethering you to reality. I know Grace Morrison fought the foster system to adopt you despite being a single woman with limited means." He closed the folder, his gray eyes fixed on hers. "And I know that Catherine was my lover. That infant in the photograph is my daughter. You are my daughter." The words landed like physical blows. Lily actually stepped backward, her body rejecting information that her mind couldn't process fast enough. "That's impossible." James stood up slowly, moving to a desk near the window. He pulled out a second folder, this one thick with papers and photographs. He handed it to Lily. 25 years ago, I was married to a woman I didn't love and running a company that consumed my life. I met Catherine Hayes at a medical conference. She was a pharmaceutical researcher, brilliant and kind, and everything my life was missing. We had an affair." The folder contained photographs, a young woman with dark hair and uncertain smile, the same woman from Lily's locket but vibrant with life. Pictures of her with a younger James Thornton, both of them laughing at something outside the frame. "When Catherine became pregnant, I begged her to let me leave my wife to build a life together. She refused. Said she wouldn't be responsible for destroying my career, my reputation. She left New York. I searched for her for months." His voice cracked slightly. "I finally found her 18 months later. She'd died during childbirth complications. The hospital records said the infant didn't survive. I believed them. I spent 24 years believing I'd lost both of you." Lily's hands shook as she held the folder. "How do you know I'm her—" James pulled out a sealed envelope from his desk. "Because 6 months ago I updated my will. I hired investigators to do one final search for Catherine's child, hoping against hope that the hospital records were wrong. They found adoption records for a 3-year-old girl named Lily placed with Grace Morrison. They found your locket, the one I gave Catherine when she told me she was pregnant. They ran DNA against public genealogy databases." He handed her the envelope. 99.9% probability. You're my daughter." Lily tore open the envelope with shaking hands. The genetic testing company's letterhead was official, the numbers stark and undeniable. Markers matched percentages, calculated relationships confirmed. She was looking at scientific proof that her entire understanding of herself was incomplete. "Why didn't you tell me before at the restaurant you recognized the locket?" "Because I wasn't certain. and because I needed to understand whether you were genuine or whether someone had sent you to exploit an old man's grief. The words stung despite their honesty. And now I know that my niece and her husband have been slowly poisoning me to prevent exactly this reunion. They knew I was looking for you. Amanda found you first. The pieces assembled themselves into a picture so ugly that Lily wanted to look away. Amanda Sterling, devoted niece caring for her elderly uncle, positioned to inherit everything. And then James decides to find his lost daughter, to rewrite his will, to disrupt the carefully constructed plan for generational wealth transfer. They're trying to kill you before you can change your will. They almost succeeded. If you hadn't been at that hospital, if you hadn't recognized the symptoms, I'd be dead, and they'd be $800 million richer. Lily sat down heavily in the leather chair, her legs unable to support her anymore. 24 years of questions crystallizing into answers she hadn't known she needed. I don't want your money. I'm not offering money. I'm offering truth. Family. A chance to know who you are and where you came from. I know who I am. I'm Grace Morrison's daughter. James smiled, sad and understanding. You can be both. Catherine would have wanted that. The conversation was interrupted by Granger returning with a phone, his expression grave. Sir, Detective Ramos is calling. They've obtained a warrant to search Mr. Vaughan's home office. James took the phone, listening intently. His face darkened as the detective spoke, his free hand clenching into a fist. Understood. Thank you. He ended the call and looked at Lily. They found a pharmacy database in Derek's computer. He's been systematically increasing my digitalis prescription for 6 months, forging my doctor's signature on refill orders. The evidence is substantial. That's good. They'll arrest him. They already did, but Amanda's lawyers are arguing she had no knowledge of Derek's actions. She's claiming she's a victim too. Of course she was. Amanda Sterling hadn't survived in a world of predators by being careless. She'd insulated herself with plausible deniability, letting Derek handle the actual poisoning while she played the devoted caretaker. Lily stood up, the folder of photographs still in her hands. I need to check on my mother. She was in renal failure when I left her. I've already arranged for her transfer to Presbyterian's VIP wing. The best nephrologists in the city are reviewing her case. All expenses covered. I didn't ask you to do that. You didn't have to. She's the woman who raised my daughter when I couldn't. I owe her everything. The generosity felt like quicksand, pulling Lily into obligations she wasn't ready to accept. But Grace needed help that Lily couldn't provide, and pride was a luxury that killed people. Thank you. James walked her to the elevator, moving carefully, still recovering from the poison that had nearly destroyed him. I have a proposition. I need someone I can trust managing my personal affairs while this investigation continues. Someone who understands medical issues and won't be compromised by Amanda's influence. I'm offering you a position as my private medical coordinator. $80,000 a year, full benefits including coverage for Grace's care. I'm not a nurse anymore. You're someone who sees what others miss and acts when action costs everything. That's worth more than any license. The elevator arrived. Lily stepped inside, her mind churning through implications and consequences. I'll think about it. That's all I ask. As the elevator descended, Lily looked at the photographs in the folder. Catherine Hayes, staring at a camera 25 years ago, young and alive, and unaware that she'd be dead within months. The woman who'd given her life and then vanished, leaving only a locket and questions. Lily had spent 24 years being nobody's daughter except Grace Morrison's. The math of identity was being rewritten in real time, and she wasn't sure whether the answer was salvation or destruction. The elevator opened into the marble lobby where Granger waited with the town car. I'll drive you to the hospital, Miss Morrison. She let him, too exhausted to fight generosity that felt like chains. Grace was sleeping when Lily arrived, transferred to a private room that had actual furniture instead of plastic chairs, windows that overlooked something other than brick walls. The nephrologist had left a detailed report. Kidney function was compromised but stabilized dialysis, likely necessary prognosis, dependent on consistent treatment. Treatment that cost more than Lily earned in a year. She sat beside her mother's bed, holding the hand that had held hers through every nightmare of childhood, and made calculations that had no good answers. Taking James Thornton's offer meant accepting that her life had been a lie, meant acknowledging that the woman sleeping in this bed wasn't her only mother, that somewhere in the equations of biology and fate, she belonged to someone else too. Refusing meant watching Grace die slowly from treatable conditions that poverty made fatal. The mathematics had never been uglier. Grace's eyes opened unfocused but calm. She smiled at Lily with the distant affection of someone who recognized a face but couldn't attach a name to it. "You're such a good girl, taking care of an old woman who can't remember her own name. You're Grace Morrison. You took in a lost child and made her family. That's your name." Grace's smile widened. "That's a nice story. You should tell it to my daughter when she visits." The words carved into Lily's chest, precise and devastating. She squeezed her mother's hand. "I'll tell her, I promise." Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "They're coming for you. Run." Before Lily could process the warning, hospital security appeared in the doorway. Behind them stood two police officers with faces that suggested this wasn't a social call. The detective who'd questioned her earlier stepped forward, her expression professionally neutral. "Lily Morrison, you're under arrest for attempted murder." The world tilted sideways. Lily stood up, her hands raised instinctively. "What are you talking about? I saved him." "Derek Vaughn has provided evidence that you had access to Mr. Thornton's medications while working at the Crown. We have security footage of you in his private dining area, witness testimony that you were obsessed with him, and financial records showing you accepted $5,000 from an offshore account registered to you 3 days ago." The setup was elegant. Amanda hadn't wasted time after Derek's arrest. She'd simply pivoted, redirecting blame from her husband to the convenient scapegoat who'd already been publicly fired and humiliated. "Those records are fabricated. I never—" "You have the right to remain silent." The handcuffs bit into Lily's wrists, and Grace watched from the bed with the detached curiosity of someone watching television. She didn't recognize her daughter being arrested, didn't understand that the girl who just promised to tell her own story was being erased in real time. They led Lily through the hospital corridors, past doctors and nurses and patients who stared with the special attention reserved for criminals. She saw Thomas Granger in the lobby, his phone pressed to his ear, his face grave as he watched her pass. She saw Amanda Sterling near the elevators, her expression perfectly calibrated sympathy, a performance for anyone watching who might question her devotion. And she saw James Thornton being wheeled out by medical staff, his face stricken, reaching toward her even as the guards pulled her in the opposite direction. The patrol car smelled of disinfectant and desperation. Lily sat in the back seat, hands cuffed behind her, and watched Manhattan blur past through windows designed to prevent escape. She'd saved a billionaire's life and discovered she was his daughter in the same 12-hour period. And now she was being framed for the same crime she'd prevented by the same people who'd committed it. The mathematics of heroism hadn't just been ugly. They'd been fatal. The arraignment happened in a courtroom that smelled of floor polish and broken promises. Lily stood before a judge who looked like he'd been ruling on human misery since the Kennedy administration, her public defender fresh out of law school and radiating the particular hopelessness of someone who knew the system was rigged but hadn't figured out how to stop caring yet. The prosecutor laid out the charges with the enthusiasm of someone describing a particularly successful hunting trip, attempted murder conspiracy to commit fraud, criminal trespass. The evidence was circumstantial but damning: fabricated financial records showing offshore payments, security footage edited to make Lily's presence at the Crown seem predatory rather than professional, witness statements from restaurant staff who'd been paid to remember her obsession with James Thornton. Amanda Sterling sat in the gallery, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief that probably cost more than Lily's entire wardrobe. She'd dressed for the occasion in subdued navy, the devoted niece devastated by her uncle's near death, and the revelation that his would-be killer was someone they'd all trusted. The judge set bail at $200,000. Lily's public defender, a young woman named Rachel Kim, who wore determination like armor, objected strenuously. Her client had no criminal record, no passport, no means of flight. She was a caregiver to an elderly mother with advanced Alzheimer's. She'd actually saved Mr. Thornton's life, a fact conveniently omitted from the prosecution's narrative. The judge was unmoved. 200,000 or Rikers Island while awaiting trial. Lily chose Rikers because she had no choice. The intake process at the women's facility was designed to strip away whatever dignity the criminal justice system hadn't already consumed. They took her clothes, her locket, her shoelaces, anything that could be weaponized in a moment of despair. They gave her orange scrubs and a cell shared with 2 other women who'd learned that survival meant minding your own business and keeping your mouth shut. Lily lay on the thin mattress that first night, staring at the ceiling where someone had scratched a countdown of days. She wondered how many women had watched that number grow, marking time until freedom or death, whichever came first. Her cellmate, a woman named Dominique, who was awaiting trial for check fraud, broke the silence around midnight. "You that waitress who tried to kill the billionaire? I'm the waitress who saved him." "Same difference in here." Dominique rolled over, ending the conversation, and Lily understood that even in a cell full of women, the system had failed. She was alone. Rachel Kim visited 3 days later, carrying a briefcase full of bad news and a single piece of hope. The DNA test came back. "James Thornton is your biological father. 99.9% probability." Lily sat across from her in the visiting room, separated by plexiglass designed to prevent contact between the accused and the outside world. "Does that help my case?" "It gives you motive to keep him alive, not kill him. But the prosecution is arguing the opposite, that you discovered the relationship and decided to secure your inheritance early by framing Amanda and Derek." "That's insane." "That's their theory. And juries love a good gold digger story." Rachel spread documents across the metal counter between them. "Here's what we know. Derek Vaughn has been charged with attempted murder and fraud. He's facing 20 years minimum. His lawyer is offering to testify against Amanda in exchange for a reduced sentence. Will he? Depends on whether Amanda's lawyers can make that deal disappear. They're very good at making things disappear." Rachel pulled out another document, this one marked with evidence tags and police department stamps. "This is more interesting. Thomas Granger Thornton's attorney has been cooperating with investigators. He provided emails showing that Amanda knew about Derek's pharmacy scheme. She was copied on correspondence discussing James's deteriorating health, medication adjustments, estate planning changes." "Then why isn't she arrested?" "Because her lawyers are arguing the emails prove nothing. She was monitoring her uncle's health as a concerned relative. The medication discussions were legitimate attempts to manage his care. The estate planning was natural curiosity about family finances." Rachel's expression hardened. "They're good, Lily. They've built her a fortress of plausible deniability. Unless we can prove she actively participated in the poisoning, she walks. And I go to prison for saving a man's life. Unless we find something that breaks their narrative." Lily thought about the warning text she'd received minutes before her arrest. The unknown number telling her to run. Someone had tried to help her, someone with information about Amanda's next move. "Can you trace a text message unknown sender sent to my phone the day I was arrested?" Rachel made a note. "I'll try. Phone companies are difficult, but I have a friend at the DA's office who owes me a favor." A guard appeared, signaling that visiting hours were ending. Rachel gathered her documents with the efficient movements of someone practiced at losing. "One more thing. James Thornton has been trying to visit you. The court denied his request on grounds that he's the victim and you're the accused. Contact would compromise the case. Tell him I don't need his pity. He's not offering pity. He's offering to pay for a real defense attorney. Someone who can actually fight this." Lily looked at the plexiglass barrier at her reflection, distorted and hollow. "I can't accept that. It looks like I'm buying my way out." "You're already buying your way in by refusing help. Pride doesn't work as a legal defense." Rachel stood up, frustration evident in every movement. "Think about it. You have a daughter's right to his resources. Use them." But Lily couldn't think about rights she'd never known she had, couldn't process the mathematics of being someone's daughter when she'd spent 24 years being someone else entirely. Grace Morrison died on a Tuesday. The call came through the facility's administrative office, delivered by a correction officer who'd learned to treat death notifications like weather reports, unfortunate but inevitable. Lily was permitted one phone call to the hospital, 5 minutes to hear the details of her mother's final hours. Dr. Patel, who'd been managing Grace's care since the transfer to Presbyterian, explained with clinical gentleness that Grace's kidneys had failed completely. They'd started dialysis, but her system couldn't handle the stress. She'd slipped into a coma, peacefully surrounded by nursing staff who'd held her hand because her daughter couldn't. "Did she say anything at the end?" A pause on the line, the sound of papers shuffling. The nurses reported that she had one lucid moment before she lost consciousness. She said, "Tell Lily that Catherine loved her. Tell Lily she was never abandoned." The words detonated something in Lily's chest, a grief so profound it felt like drowning. Grace had known. Even in the fog of Alzheimer's, she'd carried the truth about Catherine Hayes, about the woman who'd given Lily life and then disappeared into death before motherhood could properly begin. "When is the funeral?" "Mr. Thornton has arranged everything. He's requested permission for you to attend under guard supervision." "I don't want his charity." "With respect, Miss Morrison, this isn't charity. This is a father trying to give his daughter a chance to say goodbye." The permission was granted on humanitarian grounds. Lily was shackled at the wrists and ankles, transported in a corrections van to the cemetery in Westchester, where Grace Morrison would be buried beside her own parents. The November rain had returned cold and relentless, turning the cemetery into a landscape of mud and marble. A small group had gathered, James Thornton leaning heavily on a cane, Thomas Granger holding an umbrella, a handful of nurses from Sunrise Memory Care who'd cared for Grace during her decline, and standing apart from everyone else watching with the focused attention of a predator was Amanda Sterling. She'd dressed for mourning in black Chanel, her makeup perfect despite the rain. When she saw Lily arrive in handcuffs and orange jumpsuit, her smile was so brief it could have been imagined. The service was short. A minister who'd never met Grace read from generic scripture about eternal rest and heavenly peace. James Thornton stepped forward, his voice rough with emotion he couldn't quite conceal. Grace Morrison was a woman who understood that family isn't always biology. She took in a child who needed her and built a life from love and sacrifice. The world is diminished by her absence. He looked directly at Lily as he spoke, and the guards allowed her to stand close enough to see the casket lowered into earth that would hold her mother forever. Lily wanted to speak, wanted to tell everyone gathered that Grace had been fierce and funny and unbreakable until the disease broke her, that she'd worked double shifts as a home health aide to pay for Lily's school supplies, that she'd fought the foster system with the determination of someone who knew exactly how cruel institutions could be to children nobody wanted. But the words wouldn't come. Grief had stolen her voice the way Alzheimer's had stolen Grace's memory. When the service ended, James approached as close as the guards would permit. "I'm sorry I never got to thank her properly. She didn't want your thanks. She wanted me to have a good life." "Then let me help you have one." Amanda appeared at James's elbow, her hand on his arm with proprietary familiarity. "Uncle James, you shouldn't be out in this weather. Dr. Chen said you need rest." James shook her off with more force than Lily had seen him use. "I'm speaking with my daughter. Your alleged daughter who's been charged with trying to murder you. The court hasn't established paternity. The DNA test established it." Amanda's smile sharpened. "DNA tests can be manipulated. You're an elderly man who's been through trauma. You're vulnerable to manipulation by people who want access to your fortune." Thomas Granger stepped between them, his diplomatic neutrality finally cracking. "Miss Sterling, your concern for your uncle is noted. However, the genetic evidence is irrefutable. You might want to consult with your attorneys about the implications." "The only implication is that this woman is a con artist who found a clever way to exploit my uncle's grief over a dead mistress." The words were calculated to wound, and they succeeded. Lily felt the guards tense beside her, ready to intervene if the conversation escalated into violence. James's voice dropped to something cold and final. "Amanda, you are no longer welcome in my home or my life. Thomas will be filing paperwork to remove you from any medical or financial authority. Consider yourself disinherited." The cemetery went silent except for the rain. Amanda's carefully maintained composure cracked just enough to show the rage beneath. "You're making a mistake. That woman is dangerous. The only danger I've faced came from you and your husband. Get out of my sight." Amanda looked at Lily, and in that moment all pretense dropped. The hatred in her eyes was pure and absolute, the fury of someone who'd been promised everything and was watching it slip away. "This isn't over." She walked away through the rain, her expensive heels sinking into mud, leaving divots that filled with water like small graves. The guards escorted Lily back to the transport van. As they drove away from the cemetery, she looked back to see James Thornton standing beside Grace Morrison's grave, an umbrella held by Thomas Granger, paying respects to the woman who'd raised his daughter when he couldn't. The break in the case came from an unexpected source. Rachel Kim appeared at Rikers 2 days after the funeral, her expression carrying the manic energy of someone who'd gone 3 days without sleep and found something worth the exhaustion. We traced the warning text. It came from a burner phone purchased at a bodega in Hell's Kitchen. The purchase was caught on security footage. She pulled out a still image, grainy but clear enough. A young woman, early 20s, wearing a Thornton Pharmaceuticals employee badge on a lanyard around her neck. Her name is Jennifer Torres. She's been working as a personal assistant to Amanda Sterling for 18 months, and she wants to talk. Jennifer Torres sat across from Lily in a conference room normally reserved for attorney-client meetings, her hands wrapped around a paper cup of coffee she hadn't touched. She had the exhausted look of someone who'd been holding secrets too heavy to carry alone. "I sent you that text because I couldn't watch another person get destroyed." Her voice was soft accent traces of the Bronx smoothed down by corporate training. "I've been working for Amanda for a year and a half. At first it was just normal assistant stuff, scheduling correspondence, managing her calendar. But about 6 months ago, things changed." Rachel Kim had her recording device running, legal pad ready. "Changed how?" "She started having me pick up Mr. Thornton's prescriptions from different pharmacies. Always paid in cash, always destroyed the receipts. She said it was for privacy, that he didn't want his medical information tracked, but the quantities didn't match his dosage schedule." Jennifer pulled out her phone, scrolling through screenshots she'd saved with the paranoia of someone who knew documentation was survival. "I started keeping records. Every pharmacy, every pickup, every discrepancy. When Derek got arrested, I realized what I'd been helping them do. I've been poisoning Mr. Thornton by proxy for months." The photographs showed prescription bottles with labels and dates, enough digitalis to kill someone slowly over years if administered correctly. Jennifer had been Amanda's unwitting accomplice, the clean hands that kept Amanda's dirty. "Why didn't you go to the police?" "Because I'm undocumented. My work visa expired 9 months ago. Amanda knew. She said she'd sponsor my renewal, but she kept delaying the paperwork. I realized she was keeping me illegal on purpose, making sure I'd never testify against her." Rachel leaned forward, her prosecutor instincts recognizing the value of a cooperative witness. "Are you willing to testify now, even knowing it might expose your immigration status?" Jennifer met Lily's eyes across the table. "I watched you get arrested for saving someone's life. I can't be the person who stays silent while an innocent woman goes to prison. Some things matter more than documentation." The statement she gave over the next 3 hours was comprehensive enough to reconstruct 6 months of methodical poisoning. Amanda had never touched the medication herself, had never spoken directly about murder, had simply created a system where Jennifer unknowingly became the delivery mechanism for slow death. It was elegant, plausibly deniable, and with Jennifer's testimony, absolutely damning. Rachel Kim filed an emergency motion to dismiss charges against Lily Morrison and simultaneously provided Jennifer's evidence to the prosecutor handling Derek Vaughn's case. The legal machinery ground slowly, but it ground. 5 days later, Amanda Sterling was arrested at her attorney's office in Midtown. The charges were conspiracy to commit murder, attempted murder, elder abuse, and fraud. Her bail was set at $5 million, and for the first time since this nightmare began, she couldn't smile her way through it. Derek Vaughn, sensing the ship sinking, took the plea deal his attorneys had been negotiating. 20 years in federal prison in exchange for full testimony against his wife. The trial was scheduled for spring, but the outcome was already determined. Amanda Sterling would spend the rest of her productive life in a cell. Lily Morrison was released from Rikers on a Tuesday exactly 3 weeks after Grace's funeral. Rachel Kim met her at the gates with a change of clothes and the kind of exhausted triumph that came from winning against impossible odds. The DA is drafting a formal apology, not that it gives you back the time. What happens to Jennifer? Immigration attorneys are filing for asylum based on her cooperation in a major criminal case. It'll take time, 18 months minimum, but she's got a strong case. Lily stood on the sidewalk outside the facility, breathing air that didn't taste of disinfectant and desperation. The city sprawled before her, indifferent to her suffering, ready to consume her again the moment she stepped back into its machinery. "Where do I go now?" Rachel handed her a business card with an address in the Upper East Side. "James Thornton has been waiting for you. He asked Thomas Granger to arrange for Grace's cremation. The ashes are waiting at his penthouse. He thought you'd want to decide what to do with them." The weight of that simple kindness nearly broke her. The penthouse looked different in daylight. The same expensive furniture and original artwork, but warmer, somehow lived in, despite the museum quality of everything. James Thornton sat in his leather chair by the window, stronger than he'd been at the funeral, his color improved now that poison wasn't slowly destroying him from within. On the mantel beside the window sat a simple brass urn, Grace Morrison's name engraved in elegant script. Thomas Granger excused himself when Lily arrived, creating the privacy that difficult conversations required. Lily stood in the center of the living room, still wearing the clothes Rachel had brought, still feeling the ghost of handcuffs on her wrists. "I don't know how to do this." James gestured to the chair across from him. "Neither do I. I've been a father for 24 years without knowing it. There's no instruction manual for starting this late. Grace was my mother. Biology doesn't change that. I'm not asking it to. Grace Morrison gave you everything I couldn't, but that doesn't mean we can't build something new from what's left." He pulled out a folder different from the one containing Catherine's photographs, this one legal-sized and official. "I've updated my will. 80% of my estate goes to you upon my death. The remaining 20% is split between various charities and endowments. Amanda gets nothing. The company board has been restructured to remove any influence she might have had. I told you I don't want your money. And I heard you. But wanting and needing are different mathematics. You have nothing, Lily. No job, no home, no mother to care for. I'm offering you the resources to build whatever life you choose." The generosity felt overwhelming, a tidal wave of wealth that could drown someone who'd spent her entire life swimming in shallow water. "What do you want in return?" "Time, however much you're willing to give. A chance to know who you are, to tell you about who Catherine was, to be present for whatever years I have left." He stood up slowly, walking to the window that overlooked Central Park. "I spent 24 years believing I'd lost you both. I grieved for a daughter I never held, mourned a future that was stolen before it began. And then you walked into that restaurant wearing Catherine's locket and saved my life with the skills she would have used. You're not just my daughter. You're her legacy." Lily joined him at the window, looking out at a city that had tried to destroy her and failed. "I don't know how to be part of your world." "Then we'll learn together. I barely know how to be part of it myself anymore." The silence between them wasn't comfortable, but it wasn't hostile either. It was the awkward space between strangers who shared blood and trauma and the possibility of something that might become family if they were patient enough. Thomas Granger returned with documents requiring signatures. Lily's new employment contract as James's personal medical coordinator, salary and benefits, enumerated in numbers that made her dizzy. Housing arrangements in a guest house on the estate's property in Connecticut, private but connected. Access to grief counseling, medical care, legal representation for the inevitable civil suits that would follow Amanda's criminal trial. Lily signed them with shaking hands, watching her name appear on contracts that transformed her from defendant to heir in the space of a ballpoint pen's movement. The trial began 6 months later in a courtroom packed with media, legal observers, and the morbidly curious who treated murder trials like entertainment. Amanda Sterling sat at the defense table in conservative clothes chosen to make her look sympathetic. Her legal team arranged around her like defensive fortifications. Derek Vaughn testified first, his orange prison jumpsuit, a stark contrast to the expensive suits he'd worn while committing the crimes he now described. He walked the jury through the poisoning scheme with clinical detail, the forged prescriptions, the gradually increasing dosages, the careful timing designed to make James Thornton's death look natural. He described Amanda's role without emotion, explaining how she'd researched digitalis toxicity, identified the therapeutic window that would kill slowly, calculated the inheritance timeline to ensure maximum financial benefit before discovery. Jennifer Torres testified next, her voice steady despite the immigration attorneys in the gallery who would determine her fate after this trial concluded. She showed the jury her photographs, her documentation, her carefully maintained records of every prescription pickup that had contributed to attempted murder. The defense tried to destroy her credibility, pointing out her illegal status, suggesting financial motivation, implying she was a scorned employee seeking revenge. But Jennifer's documentation was too thorough, her timeline too precise to be fabrication. Lily testified on day 4. The prosecutor walked her through the evening at the Crown, the hospital confrontation, the phone conversation she'd overheard that revealed Derek's plan. The defense attorney tried to paint her as an opportunistic gold digger who'd manipulated an elderly man's grief. "Isn't it true, Miss Morrison, that you deliberately inserted yourself into Mr. Thornton's life after discovering he was searching for his lost daughter?" "No." "Isn't it true that you fabricated evidence against my client to eliminate competition for your supposed father's estate?" "No." "Isn't it true that you're a failed nursing student with a history of drug-related accusations who saw an opportunity to exploit a vulnerable billionaire?" Lily looked directly at the jury, her voice calm despite the rage burning in her chest. "I'm a daughter who lost the mother who raised her while sitting in jail for saving a man's life. Amanda Sterling poisoned her uncle for money and framed me to protect herself. Those are the only truths that matter." The jury deliberated for 4 days. When they returned, the forewoman stood with a piece of paper that contained Amanda Sterling's future. Guilty on all counts. The sentencing happened 3 weeks later. The judge, the same one who'd set Lily's bail at $200,000, showed no mercy this time. 25 years for attempted murder, concurrent sentences for fraud, and elder abuse restitution in the millions for legal fees and damages. Amanda Sterling showed no emotion as the sentence was read. She'd played her last card and lost, and whatever remained of her life would be spent in a cell smaller than the closet in her former penthouse. Derek Vaughn received 20 years as negotiated, his testimony having purchased him a slight reduction in the cost of his crimes. Henderson, the manager who'd slapped Lily at the Crown, had lost his restaurant license during the investigation. When it came out, he'd accepted bribes from Derek to fire her. Thomas Granger made certain Lily knew that Henderson was now washing dishes at a diner in Newark, the kind of cosmic justice that didn't require courtrooms. Lily stood in the kitchen of the Connecticut guest house 1 year and 3 months after Grace's death, making coffee while listening to NPR discuss political scandals that seemed trivial compared to what she'd survived. The house was smaller than James's penthouse, but larger than anywhere she'd lived before, situated on grounds that included actual trees and grass and the kind of silence that took weeks to get used to. The brass urn had sat on her mantel for over a year from the day Thomas Granger had delivered it after her release from Rikers. She'd been unable to let go, unable to scatter the ashes, unable to accept that Grace was truly gone. But today felt different. Ready, somehow. James knocked on the door at 8, their morning routine established through months of careful navigation. He'd taught her to play chess, terrible at it himself, but persistent. She'd taught him to cook simple meals, the kind that didn't require a personal chef or ingredients flown in from other continents. They had breakfast together most mornings, conversations that ranged from mundane to profound, slowly building the architecture of a relationship that had started 24 years too late. "I've been thinking about the foundation." James had established the Catherine Hayes Memorial Foundation 3 months after the trial, dedicated to providing medical care for families who couldn't afford treatment. Lily had been appointed director, using her nursing knowledge and intimate understanding of poverty to guide resource allocation. What about it? "There's a family in Queens, single mother with Alzheimer's daughter working 3 jobs trying to afford care." The story sounded familiar. Lily met his eyes across the table. How much do they need? Enough to keep the mother in decent care for the next 5 years. Maybe give the daughter a chance to actually build a life instead of just surviving. Approve it. James smiled, the expression transforming his face from austere to warm. Already did. Just wanted to make sure you agreed. After breakfast, Lily told him what she'd decided. I'm going to scatter Mom's ashes today, at Riverside Park, where she found me. James stood up, understanding without explanation. Would you like company? Yes. They drove together through autumn landscape, turning gold and crimson, the kind of colors that reminded you beauty existed even after loss. Thomas Granger had offered to drive them, but James had insisted on taking his own car, just the two of them, father and daughter navigating grief together. Riverside Park stretched along the Hudson, the water gray and endless under October clouds. This was the place where Grace Morrison had found a traumatized 3-year-old clutching a locket and refusing to speak. The spot where Lily's life had been saved the first time before she knew it needed saving. She opened the urn and let Grace Morrison's ashes scatter across water and wind, returning to the city that had been her home, her battlefield, her final resting place. You gave me everything that mattered. I hope I made you proud. James stood beside her, his hand on her shoulder, a father learning how to comfort a daughter. She would have been. Catherine, too. They stayed for a while, watching the river carry pieces of Grace toward the Atlantic, watching the city continue its indifferent rhythm. When they finally walked back to the car, Lily felt lighter somehow, as if grief had finally granted permission to begin healing. That evening, James attempted to cook pasta in the main house kitchen, inviting Lily to what had become their weekly dinner tradition. She brought wine that cost more than she used to make in a month, and a fire extinguisher because James's cooking adventures required safety equipment. They ate pasta that James had only slightly burned, drank wine, and talked about nothing important. About books they'd read and movies they'd seen and whether the gardener was stealing tomatoes from the greenhouse. It wasn't the family Lily had imagined during those years growing up in Queens, working double shifts caring for a mother who was slowly forgetting her. But it was family nonetheless, built from wreckage and DNA, and the stubborn refusal to let trauma have the final word. James raised his wine glass in a toast. To Grace Morrison, who understood that love builds family better than blood ever could. Lily touched her glass to his. And to Catherine Hayes, who gave me life even if she couldn't give me time. They drank, and outside the windows the Connecticut woods darkened into night. Somewhere in the city, Amanda Sterling was counting days in a cell. Derek Vaughn was learning that privilege didn't translate to prison respect, and Jennifer Torres was waiting for asylum approval while working with immigration advocates to help others navigate the system that had nearly destroyed her. Thomas Granger had called earlier to report that the Crown had gone up for sale after Henderson's disgrace. James had asked Lily if she wanted it. She'd said yes, and within a week the restaurant where she'd been slapped and fired belonged to her. Her first act as owner was promoting the kind kitchen worker who'd slipped her leftover food during her poorest days. Her second was instituting a policy no customer, no staff member would ever be struck on those premises again. The evening ended with James winning for once through sheer persistence rather than skill. When Lily walked back to the guest house through paths lit by solar lamps that James had installed for her safety, she looked back at the main residence where lights still burned in the study. Her father was in there, probably reading medical journals or reviewing foundation applications, trying to do in his remaining years what he hadn't been able to do in the first 24 of her life. It would never be enough. Time couldn't be recovered, childhoods couldn't be retroactively improved, losses couldn't be unmade. But it was something. And sometimes, when the mathematics of survival were calculated honestly, something was everything. Lily Morrison had spent 24 years being nobody's daughter except Grace's. Now she was two women's daughter, connected to both by different mathematics, one by choice, one by chance, both by love, that transcended the categories the world tried to impose. She'd been a waitress who saved a billionaire, a daughter who discovered her father, a prisoner who became an heir. But the only title that mattered was the one Grace had given her 2 decades ago, survivor. And survivors, Lily had learned, didn't just endure. They built something new from the ruins of what they'd lost.